sunny day. I can't remember if the weather was nice the day you were there or not.
It was.
Beautiful.
Good. So we're about to go in the front door. You don't need to worry about showing your tickets this time. There's no one sitting at the front desk, so that's fine. So we're going to walk straight into the first room, the first main room, which is the armoury, the largest gun collection of its kind anywhere in the world. 716 pistols, 387 swords, 97 bayonets, and a partridge in a pear tree. Sorry, I'd love to do that. I'm not going to do that this time. So I'm taking you on a virtual tour where I will tell you about the Kennedy family, about Culzean Castle itself, about the architect Robert Adam, and incidentally, David Kennedy, who lived in the old castle at the time in 1777, invited Robert Adam, who was an MP in London, as was David Kennedy. He was an MP for Ayrshire, and Robert Adam, who was an architect, was MP for the East Coast, Kinrossshire. So that's how they knew each other. So he was invited to design a castle fit for a clan chief, and he designed a 58-room castle, which is quite strange. I would call it a bachelor pad, because David Kennedy didn't marry, didn't have any children, and he lived in 36 of his 58 rooms. So it must have been quite a pleasant experience. So here is one of the largest exhibits or collections of pistols. And it's quite ironic because I don't know if you can see that, but in the centre there, you can see the crest of the Kennedy family, which is the same crest to this day. So you have the Earl's Coronet, the crown. You have the two swans, which are their symbol of love and peace, surrounded by the largest gun collection anywhere in the world. So quite a bit of irony. And you also have the three chevrons, the swords in the shapes of crosses, gifted to Hugh Kennedy in 1429 by none other than Joan of Arc, where he went to help Joan of Arc with his mercenary troops to fight off the English in France. So that shows you how close a link the French and the Scots still have to this day. And that's why you have a French motto, Avise la femme, meaning consider the end. So it's more like consider what you can achieve during your lifetime rather than at the end. So here we have, on the left-hand side, you have a bust of Henry VII, the father of Henry VIII, and on the right-hand side, very pertinent to Culzean Castle and the Kennedy family, is Mary, Queen of Scots. Because in 1563, long before Culzean Castle was starting to be built, Mary, Queen of Scots was invited by Gilbert Kennedy, the fourth Earl, to take her on a tour of some of his properties. For 3 days they travelled in 1563 together. Here you have a little close-up of one of the pistols, and you see the date there, which is 1802. Now that's very clear to see, but what looks quite strange is the number 4 in the middle. Not the number 4 at all. It's a symbol of Christianity, the cross, with a tag added to it to disguise it as the number 4, because that was used in India by the East India Company. So they wanted to go into battle with religion on their side, but they wanted to disguise the symbol of Christianity, otherwise that would really anger the local people. So a little bit of quirkiness there. So Mary, Queen of Scots, as I say, she was, her personal hand servant was none other than Jane Kennedy of the Kennedys of Castle, spelt Cassilis, pronounced Castles. So a very, very close link indeed to the area of Culzean Castle, because Jane Kennedy was the sister of one of the Earls of Castles. In fact, Jane Kennedy, on the day of Mary, Queen of Scots' execution, which was in 1587, she took off her scarf and placed it across the eyes of Mary so she couldn't see the executioner's blade. As a thank you, a gesture of thank you, Mary handed her cross, which you can see the cross on that bust, but the actual ribbon was adorned with pearls. So the Kennedy family still have the original cross owned by Mary, Queen of Scots. So we're about to leave the armoury and walk into the first room of the original castle when it was Cloyth Castle. It was a Scottish tower house, and then modernised in 1777 by Robert Adam, the architect. So you can see it's a lovely green pastel shades in the walls and the ceiling, that's the original shades by Robert Adam, going back 244 years ago. So quite a long time ago. Nowadays it's a small library, but it used to be a small eating room. You have the three paintings there. On the left-hand side, you have King James VI of Scotland and James I of England, son of Mary, Queen of Scots. And on the right-hand side, you have John Kennedy, the 7th Earl of Castles. In the centre, you have Thomas Kennedy, the 9th Earl, also known as the Castle Ghost. Now,
Not badass, huh?
so he did what was called the Grand Tour of Europe. If you're a very rich, if you're a young son of a rich family in Scotland or in England, traditionally you'd be sent abroad, where you would take the boat from Dover to Calais. You would then work your way over to Paris to study manners, politeness, traditions. You would then go south into Spain, or more traditionally southeast into Italy, where you do work your way down to Rome to study art and architecture, food and drink, and gambling and ladies. All part and parcel of the young gentleman's education. You might call it a gap year today. They used to call it the Grand Tour, where you would spend 2 to 3 years abroad. Now, he wanted the most famous artist of his time to paint his portrait. Very influential gentleman, Thomas Kennedy. So he asked Battoni, Pompeo Battoni of Lucca in the north of Italy, who became famous when he moved to Rome, to paint his portrait. Now, Battoni had painted 3 popes, several princes, even Catherine the Great of Russia. Thomas wanted that must-have famous artist to paint his portrait. But Battoni was too busy to paint anything other than his head and his hands. The rest of the painting, his body, was chosen by Thomas from a catalogue of bodies that were available, and that was filled in by the students at the artist studio. So that is not the body of Thomas Kennedy that you see there. But he wanted to look as though he could afford to eat lots of rich food, so that's why he's got a full stomach. When we go upstairs, you'll see a very much slimmed down version of Thomas Kennedy, painted by a Scottish artist. They always paint exactly as they see. So without further ado, we will... Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, Thomas Kennedy set up the smuggling trade at Culzean Castle. Underneath the castle, if the tide's out, you can see the caves below the castle, where they used to allow, and I say allow in inverted commas, allow smuggled goods to be stored illegally in the caves on the condition that the Kennedy family benefited to the extent of 20% of anything that was stored. Now, the main items that were stored and smuggled in were coffee, tobacco, alcohol, opium, and soap. Soap you had to pay a tax on in the UK, so that's why soap was one of the luxury goods that were brought in under cover of darkness. So here you have the caves underneath Culzean Castle, where you can only visit if the tide's out and you have a ranger from the National Trust taking you around, because they are quite dangerous and they're all locked up anyway. But the whole cliffside is festooned with caves. There you have the ceiling there of Robert Adam, and the rondel in the centre was simply by his companion artist Antonio Zucchi, who painted all of the paintings that you see in the ceilings. So we're now moving into the dining room, which used to be the original library, but the third Marquis wanted to change the library into a larger dining room, and swapped the last room, which was a small eating area, into a smaller library. So he actually destroyed the original Robert Adam ceiling in 1877, exactly 100 years afterwards. So here you have the dining table, 200 years old, with a Bristol glass and a rinser. They only had one glass they wanted to use because there was a tax called a window tax, also known as a glass tax. So the fewer glasses you have, the better. It was cheaper, would you believe, to employ servants than it was to buy extra glassware. Now this is the table when it's extended for a wedding. So you can see that it's much longer than the table that you saw when you went round the castle, where it was set for 8 people. This is set for 36 people. And here you have, very typically, I've added a few more slides. Here you have a Halloween wedding. Now, I'll start with the first very important American connection. I know I've told some of you a little bit about this gentleman. Looks very much like George Washington, and that is Captain Archibald Kennedy of the Royal Navy. Born in America when America was a British colony. He had the very first townhouse built for his father at number 1 Broadway in New York, with lawns running down to the Hudson River before they reclaimed the land and built Battery Park. He also had number 3 Broadway built, which he rented out to one of his friends. And he was actually pressured into leaving number 1 Broadway by none other than George Washington when the American War of Independence broke out, because he chose neutrality, didn't want to take sides, so he was mistrusted by both sides. So he fled from America, ended up in London, where he found out that he'd inherited the castle when David Kennedy died, because remember, David didn't marry, didn't have any children, so it went to a distant cousin from America, Captain Archibald Kennedy. Incidentally, Captain Kennedy bought an island called Bedloe's Island. It used to be called Kennedy's Island, and it's now better known as Liberty Island, where the Statue of Liberty now stands. He was one of the very first owners of what is now Liberty Island. Came to Culzean Castle in 1792 with a bank balance of £200,000 in his UK bank account. That would equate to 4.6 billion UK pounds today, or I think 7 billion US dollars. Here you have the original townhouse, which I managed to get the drawings when I visited number 1 Broadway about 3 or 4 years ago. So that was built in 1745, built on the site of 1 Broadway as a private residence by Archibald Kennedy. And here is the plaque that's on the new building that stands there today. So that was the house Captain Archibald Kennedy built here as residence, which was used in 1776 by General Washington as his headquarters. It was then replaced by the Washington Building, which was then transformed in 1920 or 21 into this building for occupancy by its owners, the International Mercantile Marine Company, and known as number 1 Broadway. And here you have the very resplendent entrance today. So a very important, very classical looking building. Now here is Captain Kennedy's son, who became the 12th Earl and latterly the first Marquis. The reason he became the first Marquis is because he mixed in the right circles. So he went from Earl to Marquis because he was friends with King William IV. But the real reason he was given a promotion in title, and I don't want anyone to take offence in this, but this is the way the Kennedy family used to operate. He was an MP in London. He mixed with Earl Grey, the Duke of Wellington, Robert Peel, and King William IV. But his firstborn son married the illegitimate daughter of King William IV. So to keep everyone happy, the king gave him a promotion in title. So he went from 12th Earl to first Marquis of his island, Ailsa Craig. And his son, who died at the age of 37, a very reckless young man who decided to do a horse race in winter from Ayr to Aberdeen, but never quite got there safely. So he died due to a very, very harsh winter. The second Marquis, on his horse Farmer, he was into all the gentlemanly pursuits of hunting, shooting and fishing, but tragically killed in a riding accident. And the third Marquis, who was responsible for changing this room from a library to a dining room, he had the shipbuilding business, known as Ailsa Shipyards, very popular and internationally known until the year 2000, when it was mothballed by the government of the day. The fourth Marquis in the Kennedy tartan kilt. I'm wearing the tie, he's wearing the kilt. With legs like mine, you don't want to see me wearing a kilt. And here you have a look back at the dining room. A lovely room, very classical style. And here is the clock, a solid silver clock. And that was commissioned by the third Marquis after his fastest racing yacht. So he had a 30-ton J-class yacht called the Bloodhound. And he used all of the prize money in 1877 to commission this solid silver clock. Now here's something that no one has ever seen, except all of you, some of you at Culzean just now, and some of you in Arizona, and some in Washington. Here you have original bloodhounds. There are a pair of bloodhounds. Now these were, when the Kennedy family had to sign over the castle to the National Trust in 1945 due to death duty tax, there was a lot of negotiation went on, and they were determined to keep the two bloodhounds, the pair of bloodhounds that went with the name of the ship. So they own the bloodhound dogs, and the National Trust owns the actual clock. But you never see these pair of bloodhounds, and they are worth quite a lot of money. We're now going on to the staircase, the oval staircase, which is the best example of Robert Adam architecture anywhere in the world. Incidentally, Robert Adam travelled, did the Grand Tour of Europe as well, but his fame spread across North America because every single federal building across North America is done in the style of Robert Adam with the Corinthian pillars. Here you have the oval staircase, and every single step is held in place with the weight of the one above in conjunction with the one below. So it's a very delicate balancing act. And the Corinthian pillars that you can see at the first level. And you can just see the top floor there, which is run as a private hotel with Ionic pillars. And from the very top looking down, and some of the paintings on the staircase. And this is quite unusual to have Napoleon in a Scottish castle, because they actually put the battery of cannons in the West Lawn, put them in place to defend Fortress Culzean against the impending invading armies of Napoleon. But Napoleon never came to this area, and it is now thought that the Kennedy family may well have been friends with Napoleon rather than enemies. And here you have Thomas Kennedy. I'll just tell you a brief story about this gentleman. He fought with Mary Queen of Scots at the Battle of Langside outside Glasgow, the shortest battle, I believe, in history, lasting 44.5 minutes. He lost the battle, he was imprisoned, he was released from prison by her son, King James VI of Scotland and James I of England, and given a title made Sir Thomas Kennedy. His brother gave him 30 miles of coastline as a thank you, so all of the land from Ayr to the town of Girvan was given to this gentleman. But he wanted more land. So one evening, when he was walking in the woods, the 29th of August to be precise, 1579, he was walking with 15 armed men and his brother, the clan chief, Gilbert Kennedy, and he came across the local abbot, the abbot of Crossraguel Abbey. So they captured the abbot, they took him to their defensive property at that time, which is called Dunure Castle. They kept him prisoner for 3 days, but they did feed him. They wined and dined him over the 3 days, and on the 4th day, the 1st of September, they asked him to sign over his land. He, of course, refused. So they were not at all happy. So Thomas Kennedy decided to strip him of all his clothes, took him down to the Black Vault at Dunure Castle. They tied his arms and legs to a rack, and they roasted him alive over a large fire until he was persuaded to sign over his land. So that's where the original reputation of the Kennedy family came. You had to ride with them, side with them, bide with them, or there's nowhere on earth to hide from them. He himself murdered another member of the Kennedy family, another faction of the Kennedys of Burgenny, and a year later, 1602, the Laird's men were lying in ambush and they murdered Sir Thomas Kennedy outside Greenan Castle, one of the 43 castles that the Kennedy family used to own. Another painting of the first Marquess in his coronation robes. So he was the MP in London, remember, and the son of the gentleman who was born in New York. He himself was born in New York. And his wife, Margaret Erskine from the House of Dun, which is also, as some of you might remember, her magic painting, which I believe Susan jumped at the time when I was describing that one. Yes. I'll move on. Here you have some vases which are simply placed in the staircase, but I think it's quite worrying that they are on the staircase because they are valued in excess of £275,000 each, and we have 2 of them, and there is no barrier round about them. So if a child knocked it over and it smashed against the stone floor, so that is the latter part of the Ming dynasty, these 2 vases. Now we're looking up at the very top, the domed ceiling there, and a young lady who I think was staying in the hotel. And we're going to Eisenhower's suite. So this is part of the castle that you didn't get to see, but you can see the carpet here, which is an exact copy of the original carpet, and it's to represent the rays of the sun. This is where he spent his evenings. And looking just round about the room, you've got a nice chandelier there. You have the flowers, which are taken from the walled gardens every Thursday by the ladies from the Air Floral Art Club, and the traditional eccentricities of the British afternoon tea, which looks quite nice. And here you have Eisenhower on the left-hand side arriving by a horse-drawn carriage, on the right-hand side meeting the 5th Marquis in 1961 with the Secret Service men in the background there. Unusually not wearing sunglasses. Always in the Hollywood movies you see them wearing sunglasses. And a bronze bust of Eisenhower and a photo of him and his wife saying happy holidays at Culzean Castle. And a painting of him in the top floor. And there's a letter from the White House just basically thanking one of the directors of the National Trust for the 3 delightful days that he spent at Culzean Castle, which is nice to see, but it's in the archives that you never get to see these things. One of the bedrooms, and you can just see a small black and white photo in the background. That was Eisenhower's son, John. And the view from the small bathroom there, which on a lovely day you're looking straight across the sea. Now we're continuing the tour in the round room, used to be called the round salon, and this room is the largest guest room anywhere in the castle. And you have a 1,000 Waterford crystal droplet chandelier, which used to be a gasolier, and every single lamp had a gas valve on it, which you used to be able to turn the gas on and off. The pastel shaded ceiling by Robert Adam, but he didn't see that completed, so that's actually a copy of an Adam ceiling. And here you have the ladies of the Kennedy family. So here is Susanna Kennedy, the Countess of Eglinton, who married the 9th Earl of Eglinton. She was the aunt to both David Kennedy, who invited Robert Adam, and Thomas Kennedy, who set up the contract with the smugglers. Now, she was their aunt, and she lived to the ripe old age of 90, dying in her 91st year, which was unheard of in those days. But she refused to wear the makeup, which was very fashionable and very deadly. But she was described as the most beautiful lady in the Kingdom of Scotland. The king actually was courting her, but she turned down the advances of the king at the time, which was King George II. And he described Lady Susanna as the most beautiful creature in all of my dominions. Not the nicest way to describe a lady as a creature, but you get the message, she was a natural beauty. Moving on to the second wife of the 6th Earl, who tragically to this day I've never heard anyone describe as a natural beauty. Moving on swiftly from my male chauvinistic comment to Lady Evelyn Stuart, who married the 3rd Marquis and became Lady Evelyn Kennedy. She was a very kind, very religious lady, and she was one of the heads of the temperance movement. She was totally against alcohol. And she set up, she had the savings that she had built up, used to build the very first church for the people of Maidens, which is the village just a mile south of Culzean. And her husband had Turnberry Hotel built, which is nowadays owned by Donald Trump. Moving on to Lady Susanna Hamilton, daughter of the 1st Duke of Hamilton. She died at the early age of 37. Can anyone remember that went in my, that I spoke to, why perhaps she died? Susan? Nope.
I don't remember,
Okay. It was the makeup that they used to apply. So it was a very thick mixture of white wax, white lead, mercury water, mixed up with arsenic, which meant they didn't live very long because that would work its way through the pores of the skin into the bloodstream, or more prominently through the smallpox scars. But there's 2 clues by the artist that she's very, very ill. He's painted both of her hands pointing downwards. Now, if you're the lady of the house, and both hands point downwards, you're on your way out. He's also given you a second clue. He's painted a sunset behind us, so she's never lived long enough to turn round and see the sun finish setting. And here you have an 8-day clock from Paris, the same time period as Napoleon, and you have the bust of Napoleon on the left, his second wife, Empress Marie-Louise, on the right, the three busts there of the Napoleonic sisters, Pauline, Caroline, and Elisa. So we're now leaving the view from the round room, which is beautiful. You're looking across the island of Arran, which is 15 miles away. Behind Arran, you have the Scottish mainland, which comes round like a large arm, called the the Kintyre Peninsula down to the Mull of Kintyre, and behind that is North America. And we're now going into the state bedroom. Now this was the most important bedroom at the time in 1700s because it had full ensuite facilities. And here is the toilet. Lovely. Just at your convenience. Now we're moving into the next guest room, the blue drawing room. Nothing to do with drawing because we like to shorten names in the UK. It was the withdrawing room. Withdrawing room by the ladies of the house to withdraw to after their 7-course, 4-hour dinner downstairs. And here you have the large painting on the left-hand side, Thomas Kennedy, the second painting of him where he's been in a diet and he's lost a lot of the weight that Battoni showed that he had downstairs. And you have some other paintings of the Grand Canal in Venice. And one of the oldest paintings in the collection, Aesop's Fables. So you can easily see the lion caught in the hunter's trap. On the right-hand side, the right-hand corner, you can see the mouse eating his way through the rope, allowing the lion to escape. So that's Aesop's Fable. That was painted 393 years ago. Thomas, who did the 2 grand tours, and during this particular tour, where he's standing holding a book by the French engineer Vauban, he arranged an audience with Pope Benedict XIV. As a result of that, he purchased the plenary indulgence to pardon all his sins, allowing him free entry through the pearly gates to heaven. And supposing you get there and you have a look around, you don't recognise anyone, don't worry, because the 50 friends and relatives that would accompany him are simply numbered 1 to 50 down the right-hand side of that magnificent document. Unfortunately covered over by his letter of thank you to the Pope in 1740. But the names that are actually written in that have been written in, scored out, written back in again as he fell in and fell out with his friends on a regular basis. So that's why it's covered up, because it's quite messy underneath that letter of thank you. But absolutely amazing that you can actually purchase your way through the pearly gates. Just one other thing to point out, because this is very true. You can see that painting. What you might not recognise is the significance of that painting, because the artist William Mossman of Aberdeen is telling you a very important story. When Thomas Kennedy went to inherit Culzean Castle, there was a challenge to the legitimacy of his inheritance by the first Earl of March, who was an offspring of Lady Susanna Kennedy. And it had to go to the House of Commons and then the House of Lords and then back to the House of Commons before, I think it was 18 years later, that he was given the title of the 9th Earl of Castles and Culzean Castle and all of the estate. And the red curtain that you can see behind him touching his right shoulder is telling you that he is the rightful heir, and the red curtain signifies the Kennedy bloodline, so that shows the legitimacy of the challenge. So there's a whole story behind that painting, but you don't know that unless someone was to tell you that. So moving on, there you have a lovely music box. Did I let you hear the music from that? I think I might have, no? Oh, maybe I didn't. Sorry, I don't have any audio here that I can let you listen to, but it still works perfectly. You'll need to come back again. There's the excuse. So there you have the ceiling, an original ceiling by Robert Adam, and a wee close-up here you have the painting by Antonio Zucchi, and in the centre you've got Cupid being chastised by his mother Venus with the other ladies looking on. And we're now about to leave the blue drawing room and go into the long drawing room, which is the original upstairs part of the Tower House, when it was just upstairs and downstairs, but modernised by Robert Adam. So you have all the different parasol shades in the ceiling. You have the third Marquis in the local naval uniform. He's the gentleman that had the shipbuilding business. And here you have two paintings of Culzean Castle. This one here used to sit in the first Marquis's London townhouses. And he used to point up to this painting. This is my summer house in Scotland, my 58-room summer house. Remember, he inherited his father's wealth, his father's £200,000. But he used to exaggerate quite a lot. If you, the cliffs are nowhere near that height, but if you're paying the artist, you tell him how high you want your cliffs to look, and he's very kindly obliged. And there's a large building in the background, which looks like an even larger estate, but actually is in fact the small farm buildings, which is now the visitor centre. Right. Here you have the other painting of Culzean Castle, and I'm sorry it's quite dark on the screen there, but the castle is the same height as the cliffs themselves. On the left hand side you can just see very small buildings in the foreground. That is the small farm buildings, but made to look like an even larger castle in the other painting by Alexander Naismith. And the centre of that painting is Ailsa Craig. So he's obviously pointing out to his London guests, this is the name of the island where I still own the island, and I took the name of the title from King William IV after my island, Marquis of Ailsa Craig. And here you have another painting of Culzean Castle on the back of the original Royal Bank of Scotland £5 note until 3 years ago. So that original painting is owned by Lord David Kennedy, the current clan chief. Here you have Ailsa Craig, which you can see from the next room, which is Lady Ailsa's boudoir. And that island is still owned by the Kennedy family, and it produces an income every 3 months from the curling stone granite. For every Olympic team in the world, they get their granite from Lord David Kennedy's volcanic plug. Here you have a black and white photo of the fastest racing yacht owned by the third Marquis, the Bloodhound. And you have a harp here, just to give you a clue as to how prominent the Kennedy family were at that time. There was 3 copies of that harp made. One to His Most Royal Christian Majesty, the King of France, one to the Tsar and Emperor of all of the Russias, and one to the Kennedy family.
That's pretty interesting.
There you have a classic tabletop piano, which is an octave and a half shorter than today's pianos now, from 1811. And we're about to leave the long drawing room, and the last of the guest rooms, we're about to move into Lady Ailsa's boudoir. And no guest would ever be invited into the lady's boudoir, but you're very fortunate she's out today. Now, you won't recognise some of these paintings because that's not the paintings you would have seen when you came round the castle a couple of weeks ago. But there's a painting of Mary Queen of Scots there. Lord David Kennedy owns the original painting, we just have a copy of it. Now here you have the original purpose of the room. Very often Robert Adam, the architect, will tell you the original purpose or use of the room by the frieze that he put in place in 1777. Here you have poppies blowing in the wind. So this is the room that the lady of the house would grow tired in. Why? Because the poppies, you produce the opiates that form the opium. And the lady used to smoke the opium, and there you have the opium pipe here that the lady used to use. And we're now moving into Lady Ailsa's dressing room. So you can see 2 paintings there. The top one in the centre is Lady Evelyn Kennedy. That's the lady who married the third Marquis who had the shipbuilding business. He was besotted with her. He was madly in love with her. He built her a yacht called the Lady Evelyn, and she spent 6 months a year touring the Mediterranean and 6 months a year at her home at Culzean Castle. But she died tragically in 1888 at the age of 40 from tuberculosis. When she died, her children were given to her aunt, the Countess of Seafield, and on the right hand side you see the Countess with her young child. Now that young child with the curly golden hair and the off the shoulder dress is her little boy. Yes, that's the way they used to dress. Both boys and girls were dressed in a similar way, but simply for one reason: to keep the firstborn son and heir to the title in the estate safe from kidnap and ransom. If they looked like a little girl, they were completely safe. Here you have a boat built by the boatmen at the shipyards for the birth of their first daughter, Lady Marjorie, and she used this as her crib. And here you have the wedding present to Lady Evelyn Kennedy on her wedding day. This set was made by the jewellers to Queen Victoria, a very priceless item, completely intact and used by Lady Evelyn Kennedy. Here you can get to see a close-up, which unfortunately you didn't get to see when you came round the castle. But this was a travel makeup case. So in the left-hand tray, you can see a ship's whistle in the very centre, so she can check which direction she's travelling in on her own yacht when she's heading to her favourite island, Malta. And in the left-hand side of the compass, you have a small ship's whistle. So she doesn't have the luxury of the servants' handles beside the fireplaces to turn. She simply blows the whistle to summon the servants. The very bottom item, which is an ivory handle and a long, very thin piece of metal, is the lady's earwax spoon. Not something I would highly recommend. And she also has a barometer, so she can check the weather conditions and dress according to the weather. Excuse me a minute till I just soothe my throat. And does anyone know what the item at the very front of the makeup case could be? That metal looks like a curling tongue.
It's like a curling iron.
It's very similar to that, and you're very close. You would take the end of that and to place it into the fingers of skin-tight gloves, leather gloves, to stretch the fabric so she could place her fingers in comfortably. Because if the leather gloves got wet, they would lose their shape. So that was to stretch the fabric so she could place her fingers in and then wear the rings over the top of the gloved fingers, which was the fashion. So that's a glove stretcher.
Interesting.
And there you have one of the original pole screens, because that would normally be beside a roaring fire to protect the lady's makeup from melting, because remember the outer layer is white wax. And if the lady didn't have the pole screen at head height, the lady would simply lose face, which is an expression that's no longer used. Also, you'll see that in all the paintings that the lady never smiled, and there's an old expression because the lady would have cracked a smile, because if her makeup was white wax, if she did smile, it would crack, so that's why she would never smile. And there you have a bath and shower combination unit made specially for Lady Evelyn Kennedy. So the hot and cold for the shower, which is a gravity tank up above and rows of pinprick holes, and hot and cold for the bath itself, and that's a close-up of Lady Evelyn and the Countess of Seafield with her young son. And there you have John Kennedy, at 5 years of age, wearing a blue dress, standing in front of his swan pond. We're now going through the family bedroom, and then I'm going to take you a little diversion down the servants' staircase, which you don't get to see, into the Georgian kitchen. It's a very bright kitchen, used to be a separate building entirely from the castle, because they wanted it separate in case any fire would likely start from the kitchen, so it didn't spread to the castle. And here's something that I might not have showed you, but we're always finding things out at Culzean. And in the very left-hand back window there, the top arched window, we had someone working in the glass, and there was a little bit of water seepage. And he said, "Do you know there's someone's name carved in this glass?" I said, "No, can you take a photo of it?" So that is the name Thomas Shaw, the old spelling of Shaw, 1828. But the unusual, quirky part of this story is he's actually inscribed it from the reverse of the window. So he's actually written it back to front on the outside. So don't understand that, and I haven't managed to find out any information on who this Thomas Shaw was. And there you have 91 copper pots and pans. And the original automated cooking device. So the heat from the fire would traditionally turn the fan, which is up at the top there, just through the glass window there, and the fan would then rotate the spit through the cogs, gears and chains, so it's fully automated. The bigger the fire, the faster it would turn, and the quicker that the meat would actually cook. And you have some items there. You've got a potato ricer on the left-hand side. You've got a juicer. You've got a rolling pin, which will be filled with water and ice, seawater and ice from their own ice house. Because apparently the best pastry, or the best pastry chefs have the coldest fingers. And one of the interlopers that we managed to capture, no, they would use anything and everything. That was a brown water rat, but they would normally use the mice, which was for the ladies' makeup, because the ladies used to wear the mouse fur over the top of their eyebrows.
Ew.
Here you have a clock tower with a double rainbow. And just a couple of views of Culzean Castle. This was done earlier this summer. I took that one. The sun was just starting to go down behind Arran. And an aerial shot which a friend sent to me, which you can see Earls of Craig in the background.
Wow.
And a Christmas shot which I took about 4 years ago. So that is your virtual tour of Culzean Castle.
Wow, that's impressive.
I'd be delighted if you have any questions or anything I can hopefully answer. So here's your chance.
Well, I know some people wanted to hear about the ghosts.
Yep.
Your ghost stories.
Well, Thomas Kennedy is the gentleman that is seen very often, especially by young ladies going around the castle. I don't know why. It doesn't seem to ever be guys. It's always young ladies. In the state bedroom, which is the most haunted room in the castle, which is that room there, if you can still see there. They filmed Britain's Most Haunted, a television programme in 2010. They filmed Ghost Hunters in 2016, again in 2018. And apparently there was a few strange occurrences, but I'm quite cynical when it comes to these things. Has anything ever happened to me directly? No. But it's happened to people that were on my tours, and happens quite regularly to people that are on my tours. So I seem that the guides all blame me for being the catalyst. And I was taking a group tour around about 3, maybe 4 years ago, and there's a large painting in that room which you can't see from that angle of Queen Charlotte. And the guide lets all the group walk through that room. We take a shortcut because A, it's a very narrow room, and B, it can't hold a lot of people. So we let the group make their way through that, and then we restart the tour again in the blue drawing room. So I didn't go through that room. But at the end of the tour, I said, does anyone have any questions? And a few hands went up, and this young lady was very fidgety. And I would say she was in her mid to late 20s. And I said, do you have a question? No, I'll wait till everyone has left the room. Now, when everyone did eventually leave the room, she wanted to report that someone had touched her in this room. Basically had pushed against her or pushed her back, and she turned round to say stop doing that, and there was no one else in the room. Now you can't really see, but there's actually a camera. Can you see my cursor there?
Mm-hmm.
There's a camera exactly there, so there's a full pan of this area, and she's standing basically where I'm using the arrow just now, facing towards the back wall. So it could easily see her, and it could easily see there was no one else in the room. Now she wanted to make a statement to the police, so we had to involve the head guide, another guide to act as a second witness, and myself, because I took her on the tour. But what do you say to police if there's no one there in the camera? But that's one of the many things that happens. But the last thing that happened, because we didn't do any tours this year, we were closed last year, so 2019 I was standing in the long drawing room next to the blue drawing room, and I was actually relating some ghost stories to another member of the National Trust for Scotland. He was doing a blog, which I think I sent you a link this morning, Eric,
Yes.
to some of the ghost stories. So that was a chap called Alistair who was doing a blog about them. And while I was relating him a story, that shows you just how things tend to happen round about me. This young mother came into the room and she said, "Is that last room haunted?" "No." "What makes you say that?" "The blue drawing room." I said, "There is a painting of the castle ghost in that room wearing a blue jacket. You better speak to my husband." So this very burly guy, this very muscular guy walked into the room. Well, he sort of was shaking when he came in the room. Had to get him to take a seat. I got him a glass of water, and he said he was trying to help the children look for the Lego characters, which they're hidden in all the rooms. And he noticed on the writing desk an inkwell lid slowly go down. Now, okay, that can happen because it is gravity after all, but it's a double inkwell lid, and one went down and the other one rose up. Now, that couldn't possibly happen. And we have that in CCTV as well. So goodness knows how that happened or what could have made it happen. But it's very difficult to see in the CCTV because it's very small items. You can just make out the movement. So many things have happened. Again, I was in the blue drawing room just monitoring the room, and there was 4 young girls came into the room, probably aged about 11 or 12 years of age, and they were doing the Lego hunt. The mothers were still back a few rooms behind them, and I heard one of them shout, "I can't see the Lego man," and the others just pointed at one of the paintings where the Lego man was hiding, and he says, "I can't see him. He's next to the painting of the man we saw lying in the bed." Now at this point, I just went, "What? What are you talking about?" "She's looking for the Lego man." Very matter of fact. I said, "But what did you say about this man, which is the painting of Thomas Kennedy, lying in a bed?" "Yes." "What bed?" "Come here and we'll show you." So they started marching back the way, and I started following them thinking, what the heck am I going to be looking at here? Took me back to the state bedroom. They pointed at this bed and said, "That's the bed." And I said, "Is he lying there just now?" "No, of course he's not. You can see he's not." So, how do you know it was that man? Because he was wearing a white wig and he looked exactly like him. As if, don't be stupid. Why are you asking all these questions? So at this point, I used the walkie-talkie to radio all my colleagues and say, "Is there anyone dressed up today that's, playing pranks, or it wasn't anywhere near Halloween?" "No, Bill, what have you been drinking?" So again, things that tend to happen round about me, I don't ask for them to happen, but they seem to happen in a fairly regular occurrence. So that's some of the things that's happened. But they were talking about having a psychic evening and calling me to stay one night, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning to do this tour. I don't really fancy that. I did stay. I can tell you another story. I did stay in Eisenhower's suite I was given a stay overnight as a thank you from the National Trust because I did a lot of voluntary work for them, and I stayed with my wife